is Chapter 8, looking at quantitative design with experimental and survey research. So within quantitative design, there is two types of design. You can, which we've kind of touched on last chapter, which is experimental and survey. And we will definitely not be doing experimental research. And experimental research is when you have an independent variable that is manipulated or varied to see what happens to the dependent variable. So some examples of experimental research that can be done in retail would be experimenting with different finishes on jeans and how those different finishes looked on the jeans. Another one of experimental research would be changing the floor plan of a retail establishment to see how it affects sales. And a third example would be using different zipper closures on fabric to see which one is more popular or gives a different design look. Next is survey research, which is what we'll be doing, which measures and describes attitudes, opinions, and achievement. And with survey research, variables are not manipulated, and they're studied in the context of the social situation. Also, survey research is most widely used research type, and it's used in retail marketing, store design, product development, and many other areas. And survey research helps determine relationships and effects among variables. So you're going to look at how different variables are affected by different things. So a lot of you are doing research where we're looking at purchase intentions, and you're looking at either how attitude or brand loyalty or all different things affect purchase intentions or buying behavior. So within surveys, you could do a questionnaire, you could do interviews, you could do polls or focus groups. However, if you did do a focus group, it would not be quantitative research. Next is experimental research. And with experimental research, you're going to have one or more events, conditions, or situations. And this is called the independent variable, and it's manipulated or changed by the researcher. So an example would be knowledge is an independent variable when given a test at the beginning of this semester. And then your manipulation of that variable would be all of the teaching you would receive throughout the semester. And at the end of the semester, you'd be given the same test to see if your knowledge had changed. And some questions that you want to ask when doing experimental design are: how are the variables used? How are independent variables manipulated? And are there any extraneous or irrelevant or unrelated variables? And how reliable is your study? And how can a researcher control extraneous variables to avoid internal and external validity? So looking at variables, there's two types of variables in the study. There's an independent variable and a dependent variable. The independent variables are manipulated or changed and deliberately controlled and observed to see what will be affected by that change. The observation or effect that is influenced by changes to the independent variable is the dependent variable. An example of looking at the independent and dependent variables. We're looking at making caramel popcorn. And if we look at how we can change the independent variables, that would be our ingredients. So we have salt, sugar, brown sugar, and popcorn. So with those, we can change those variables, the amount that we use of, say, sugar, salt, the type of popcorn that we use, and those different things will affect our dependent variables, which would be the taste, the color, and the stickiness. Because the taste, the color, and the stickiness are dependent variables because they're affected by the changes in the independent variables. So now let's do an example of an experiment to kind of try to reiterate the difference between the independent and dependent variable. So in our example, we're going to look at washing or laundering identical silk swatches to analyze the best method of laundering. So laundering is our independent variable, and our dependent variable is going to be the measurement of the swatch. So looking at the different forms of laundering and how they affect the change the swatch. So we're going to look at shrinkage. So more or less our shrinkage is going to be our dependent variable. So if you look at our swatches, there's 20, we use 20 silk swatches in each one. So the first 20 silk swatches are hand washed, and then they're measured for shrinkage. The next 20 are machine washed and measured for shrinkage. And then the last 20 are dry cleaned and measured for shrinkage. So within those, the type of washing that's used is the independent variable, and shrinkage is our dependent variable. Other independent variables that could be used for this example would be how long the swatches were left in the sunlight to dry. You could also look at how long the swatches are actually washed or left in the detergent solution, or you could look at the type of laundry or dry cleaning solution that's used. And some other dependent variables that could be analyzed are the changes in coloration from the laundering or from the sunlight. You could also look at pilling, stretching, and other changes in the fabric swatches. And the next slide just kind of shows you if you're looking at a true research article, when they will be doing or graphs, charts or graphs, they'll use symbols of letters and numbers instead of all of the stuff written out that you just saw in the last slide to describe things, and then they'll have formulas with them. And we are not going to be doing this, so I just wanted you to kind of see what it would look like if you did change it to this format. But this is not something that we'll be doing, so you don't need to worry about how to do this. Now we're going to look at confounding or extraneous variables that influence your study, but they are not independent variables, and they can affect the results of the experiment. So researchers must control the experiment by keeping the conditions constant and usually only variables that are related to the hypothesis or the question of the study. So we've kind of mentioned that before, that you only want to ask questions that relate to your research question or hypothesis. And you want to control for extraneous variables because they add an error to the study. So an example would be you want to measure students' effectiveness using a new learning strategy in a retelling course. So an example of the extraneous variable would be that the students would come in with different amounts of retell knowledge on the subject studied. So the results would be skewed some because some people may come in with more knowledge than others about the retelling topic that you're going to learn. So you would want to use random assignment to groups to help overcome this error variance. So that's why we'll talk about randomization and how it helps control for extraneous variables. And some ways to help control for extraneous variables is to keep the conditions constant and use only variables that are related to your hypothesis or question. And confounding or extraneous variables can be any variables that are affecting your study's results that you may have trouble identifying their causes. Next is reliability, and reliability refers to how consistently an instrument in a study measures the results. And to ensure reliability, you can do the survey multiple times or use equivalent instrument to ensure that you get the same results each time. However, most studies are just conducted once, but a theory would be tested over and over again to make sure it's reliable. So that's why I've kind of mentioned to y'all that if you can find a research study that already has questions that are going to be similar to yours that you could use their questions because they've already been tested more than one time, and they've used questions that have probably come from another researcher, so these questions have been tested multiple times to give you reliability. Also, in your study, you want to have reliability and validity, which refers to the truth or the accuracy of the research and how honest is your results. And there are two types of validity. First is internal validity, and this is when your experiment is interpretable based on control, measurement, analysis, and procedures. And the instrument measures what it is designed to measure, and you can understand data and draw conclusions. Also, to have internal validity, you need to have your methodology controlled by controlling the procedure of how the measurement is given, Next is external validity, and this is where results are interpreted accurately and can be generalized to other populations and conditions. So some factors that can lead to external invalidity, so saying that you won't have external validity, would be reactivity of the instrument, or you could also have invalidity of instruments, or you could also have confounding characteristics of the particular sample. So that would mean that the sample chosen may not adequately represent the population to which the results are to be generalized. Another effect that can cause external invalidity would be the Hawthorne effect. And this is when subjects know they're in an experiment, so they do not answer how they usually would, but how they think you want them to answer. So that's why we always say at the beginning of our questionnaire that your results will be anonymous, and please answer truthfully, because we will not know who you are in any way. Next are some terms used when designing experimental research. You can have a pre and post test when doing your research. And a pre-test is used to measure the sample before the experimental treatment, and a post-test measures taken after the treatment to see if there has been a change. So an example would be giving the exam on the first day of our class to see how much of you know about research, and then giving you the same exam at the end of the semester to see if there's been a change in knowledge. So looking at types of experimental designs, there are a bunch of different types of designs that you can do, but we will actually be doing the one group post-test because we'll really not be doing the whole pre-test, post-test, or factorial design or anything else like that. So it's good for you to know what these different ones are, but these won't actually be on your test. So if you just know that for your study you're going to use a one group post-test, that's all you need to know. And looking at research designs, true research designs answer the research question using statistics to draw conclusions about your hypothesis or research question. True research also controls extraneous variables using sampling randomization and a control group that can be comparable to experimental groups. Also, true research can be generalized to a greater population, so conclusions can be implied, applied, or generalized to a larger population. And reliability and validity are controlled and are able to be generalized. So now we're going to look at survey research, which is what you will be doing. So with survey research, there's many variations used by fashion design and retailing. Within survey research, it can be quantitative or qualitative. So I kind of remember the example that was given earlier on survey research was focus groups, which are qualitative. Also, objectives to include are to explore, describe, explain, or evaluate. And also, survey research can study things in the past as they exist now or as they might be in the future. So an example of that, if you look at the past to the future, you could look at how cotton was viewed in the past as a poor man's fabric to now how cotton is a popular fabric for its breathable qualities. So looking at survey questions, a lot of times when you do a survey question, you're going to look at either knowledge, opinions, attitudes, beliefs, or personality. And you can also measure change by using a pre and post test survey. So looking at the fashion industry professionals may want to survey a customer's knowledge of textile fabrics or opinions of where consumers like to find information about what's on sale. Another example of a survey question could look at attitudes about the customer service staff in a retail store. You could also look at beliefs of consumers about shopping in a retail store on a Sunday. You could also look at consumers' personality and how it's reflected in their dress. And within survey research, the field of sociology and psychology are both underlying factors in this form of research. And so you'll see that when you look at some of your terms like purchase intentions comes directly from sociological and psychological backgrounds. And so an example of something that's also been done by the National Retail Federation on Survey Research, they conduct attitude surveys in spending related to special buying seasons. And you can also look on table 811 in your book, 8.11 in your book, about the U.S. Department of Labor Consumer of Housing Furnishings and Apparel expenditures for abbreviated survey that they've done, just as kind of an example. Now we're going to look at Oppenheim's 4 variables of an individual, which are opinions, attitudes, values, and personality, which are all in our brain. And this is the tree model that illustrates how these 4 variables make up an individual's being. And opinions are in descriptive surveys, and these surveys count the number of subjects that engage in a characteristic or activity. So in fashion, the opinion may be how often you wash your clothing, how often you go shopping, or how often you read a label inside of a garment. Next is attitude, which is the state of readiness, and it's the tendency to respond in a certain manner when confronted with a certain stimuli. And it may be about one's feelings or emotional involvement. So an example of an attitude could be consumers believe that black clothing makes them look skinnier. And part of attitudes is belief. It's a type of attitude, and it's a general ideal or thought to be true. And it's a cognitive component of what people know. And it's less enduring, superficial, general, and more changeable. Next is personality. And this is the core of the trunk of the tree, and it's who we are as individuals. And also we have values, which are just our core beliefs. Our opinions and attitudes, we don't have as strong convictions about them, and they are more changeable. But when you get down further to values and our personality, those are more enduring and more our most basic beliefs. And so those are ones that are much harder to change.